10 years ago, the doors of Ontario's last residential institution closed. It was the final chapter in decades of public policy that saw people with developmental disabilities isolated from the community and where some experienced abuse and neglect. Catherine McKercher's brother Bill was a resident of one of those institutions. She details the world he and so many others faced in her new book. It's called Shut Away: When Down Syndrome Was a Life Sentence. Catherine McKercher is a professor emerita at Carleton University, and she joins us now for more. It's so good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is a very heavy book and a very heavy subject. I'm going to put it right out there off the top, but you've made a real contribution to better understanding a really troubling time in our history here.
Thank you.
And let's start with Bill. Tell us about Bill, your brother Bill.
Well, Bill was born in September 1956 with Down syndrome, and it was visible from the moment he was born. My mother got the news as soon as she came out of the anesthetic from the pre-delivery anesthetic. Mm-hmm. And he lived with us until he was 2.5, in large part because he was unable to move to the institution until then. My father called the Ontario Hospital School at Smiths Falls when he was still a newborn to see if he could be moved directly to the institution.
Right from birth?
Right from birth. And the answer was no, they couldn't take newborns. So my parents brought Bill home, and he lived with us for a couple of years. He was the fourth in a family of 4. And when he was 2.5, my parents moved him to the Ontario Hospital School, and he never came home again.
How much appreciation was there among the other siblings that Billy was different?
Well, we were told he was different right from the get-go, and we were told he was different in a negative way, not in a good way. But really, at 4, do you pay much attention to the nuances of Down syndrome? No, we just saw him as another baby.
Would his treatment, in other words, moving to an institution at the age of 2.5, have been different from the way it was typically done at this time?
Actually, it was quite common for kids with Down syndrome to move into these institutions at a younger age than most other kids who lived in the institution.
What kind of pressure did your parents feel that they were under to make a decision one way or another about this?
The entire society was built in such a way that there was no room in the community for kids like Bill. He was barred from going to the local public school at the time because his IQ would have been too low. He couldn't take swimming lessons at the municipal pool. There were no programs, no supports, no nothing. And then in addition, there was pressure from the health side of things that the institution would offer Bill his best chance for progress and happiness, because it was the only place he could get some sort of education, and he would be able to live, as they said, with his own kind rather than with the rest of us. There was family pressure as well, too, and in short, my parents heard this from all directions.
Now, let's acknowledge, this is 5.5 decades ago.
Yes.
At a time when, I think I remember reading this in the book, many people would have seen Bill's birth as somehow evidence that your parents had done something wrong,
yes,
or something evil was being visited upon the family because of, right? That was in the air, wasn't it?
This was actually the remnants of the eugenics era. And the sense was, and there was kind of a religious overtone to it as well, and the idea, the Old Testament idea that the sins of the father shall be visited upon the child. So there was something kind of shameful about having a child with a disability.
And yours was a church every Sunday family, was it not?
Absolutely.
So your parents really felt this message quite keenly, I guess.
I think they felt it mostly from family, not so much from the church. One of my old biddy great aunts used to come up with that phrase now and then, and she also blamed, this is my father's aunt, she blamed my mother, saying that my mother's family must have had tainted blood to pass on something like this to a child.
What a thing for your mother to have to live with.
Terrible.
Okay, Billy is sent away. How often did you see him after that?
Well, we couldn't see him for the first month or two to give him time to settle in. But after that, we went to visit him every month faithfully. One Saturday a month, we'd pile into Dad's car and drive to Smiths Falls, which was about an hour's drive away. We never got to see where he actually lived.
His room?
No, we didn't see his ward, not his room. We never saw those when we were kids. They would bring him down to the visiting room, and he would always be well-dressed and looked good. And we'd take him out to the park for a couple of hours, have a picnic, drop him off, drive back home. And after most of those visits, my mother would disappear into the bedroom and close the door. And it was very, very hard on her.
What do you think happened behind that closed door?
Oh, I think a lot of tears.
Did Billy ever return home?
Never.
So the institution was his home for the remainder of his life?
Yes. Now, I assumed as a child that we weren't allowed to bring him home. It turns out that was not the case. It was a decision that my father made that this would be his home, and that bringing him home to stay with us would only confuse him or would not be a good idea.
Now let's remember, again, 5.5 decades ago,
Yeah.
was it reasonable for your parents to believe that Billy's best interests would have been served by being in that institution?
This was what they were told, and the fact the institution was a hospital school, I think they found reassuring. You know, my dad was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. My mother was a nurse, and the routines of the hospital were something they found quite comforting. The information from the government as well was that, yes, this was the best place for these children, and there were thousands of children at Smiths Falls, at Huronia, and then later a smaller number at
Rideau?
the Southwestern.
Oh, in Southwestern.
Yeah, the Ontario Hospital School became Rideau Regional.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, this notion that people with developmental disabilities needed to be somehow institutionalized and taken away from their families, where'd that come from in the first place?
Oh, that goes back to the 19th century. In the 19th century, there was nothing. I mean, there was less for people with disabilities than there was in the 20th century. And many of them just ended up in the county jail. So starting in the last half of the 19th century, people started thinking, well, there should be another way we can do this. And in the US and Britain, a whole bunch of boarding schools showed up for kids with disabilities, and they were real boarding schools. So the kids would go, they'd live there, they'd come home for summers, they'd come home at Christmas. And the hope was that they could be improved. And some schools even suggested they could cure children with disabilities. That didn't really catch on in Canada. In Canada, we had, the idea was that intellectual disabilities were actually a form of what they used to call lunacy. So they were lumped together with what we now see as psychiatric illnesses.
Oh, the names on some of these institutions were bizarre. I mean,
Yes.
do you want to share some of them?
The Asylum for Idiots. Yeah.
That's what they call it. Like that was the real name of the place.
Exactly, yeah. And so so for a time, both groups were living in the same place, which really wasn't helpful for either. So they set up the institution at Orillia in the last quarter of the 19th century.
So most of our institutions then here in the province of Ontario would have dated to that time, is
Yes.
that right? Okay. When did we see the beginnings of a pushback against that way to treat people?
I think that started in the 60s and gathered steam in the 70s. Although there were hints before then. There were a couple of exposés of some of the big American institutions that were dreadful. But really, I think it started in the 60s. My brother came along just before that happened.
Now, I got to tell you, one of the things that makes this story so fascinating on the one hand and gut-wrenching on the other hand, fascinating because you're a former journalist and you taught journalism.
Yep.
So you're sort of ideally suited to do all the research required. You know how it's done to get a story out.
Thank you.
But this is your life.
It's a personal story.
This is a very personal story. And at some point, I gather, you had to file a lawsuit in order to get Bill's information?
No,
What
actually, it was an
happened there?
access to information
Access
request,
to
not a
information.
lawsuit.
Okay.
It was a lawsuit that enabled me to do this. After the institutions closed, there were 3 class action lawsuits filed on behalf of the residents of the 3 biggest. So that was the one Bill was at, Huronia, and the one in Chatham-Kent. And it took a long time for those suits to work their way through, but the settlement enabled former residents or their surviving family members to apply for their resident file.
But I think you didn't get any of that, did you?
Oh no, I did. I was
did?
able to
Okay.
get that. Yeah, there are other people who didn't. There were some, in fact, and this to me was one of the most heartbreaking things. There were some former residents who applied for their file and were told, no, we don't have any record of you being there. It's like, oh, how bad can that be? No, so I was able to apply for it, and it landed in my mailbox a couple of weeks later. It was 1,200 pages long, which is quite a bit longer than most of the files. And then in addition, as a result of the lawsuit, the province agreed to put something like 65,000 documents in an electronic archive at the Archives of Ontario. And so it was those 2 sets of documents, Bill's file and the ones in the archives, that were the things I probed most deeply.
What was the most, or what were the most important and salient facts that you learned from having access to Bill's files?
Well, there were just so many moments when I went through and would have to put it down and pick my jaw back up again. The first, I think, was when he was 5. There was a note in his file, just very casually, that said, may have restraint jacket, PRN, which means when the staff think it's necessary. And Bill was 5, and he was a little guy. He was undersized always. As an adult, he was maybe 4'11". And I'm trying to imagine what circumstance would there be that you would want to put a little shy 5-year-old guy like this in a restraint jacket.
In your experience with him, he'd never shown signs of violence or temper or that kind of thing, had he?
No, he was actually a cheerful and happy little guy, and physically shy and not bold. So this kind of shocked me.
Did you ever see any evidence in the files that he had been neglected or abused?
His entire file was a story, really, of neglect up until the late 80s and the 90s. He had, when he was about 9 or 10, he started pulling out his hair. Started with his eyelashes and then moved to an eyebrow and then the other eyebrow and then patches on his head. And that's, I think, pretty well recognized as an anxiety disorder, or, you know, a symptom of maybe some obsessive compulsive behavior. They sent him to the doctor in the institution, who looked to see whether he had ringworm or some other fungus that was possibly contagious. And without that, they said, no, he's pulling it out himself. Oh, okay, that was about that. And for the rest of his life, that was kind of dismissed as, oh, well, it's just, you know, one of his quirks.
We're going to bring a picture up of Bill right now,
Okay.
and I want, for those listening on podcast, I want to describe it a little bit, because the happy-go-lucky kid that you remembered
yes.
now has lost much of his hair
Yes.
and doesn't look very happy in that picture, I have to say. When was this taken?
That was taken about 2 days before he died.
As
And
you look at that
can see
picture,
the eyebrow. He's only got half of one eyebrow. And yeah.
as you look at that picture, what comes into your head?
What a small and constrained life he led. How little we got to enjoy him, how little he got to see of the wider world.
Because his world was essentially that institution,
Yes.
wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much it, except for the times that you would have visited him. How old was Billy when he died?
He was 38.
And what did he die of?
He died of liver failure that was caused by chronic hepatitis B, which he picked up at the institution at some point, and we have no idea when. The first test that he had that I could find in his file was done in 1975, and at that point he had a chronic form of the disease.
Now, they shared needles in the institutions back then,
Well,
right?
as far as we know, yes, they did.
So he might have picked it up that way.
My father was convinced that he got it from badly done childhood inoculations. Somebody just loading up a syringe, poking a kid, loading it up, poking the next kid, loading it up and poking the next. And in fact, among residents with Down syndrome in these institutions, at Huronia and at Rideau Regional as well, something like 25% of Down syndrome residents had chronic forms of the disease. And the younger you are when you get it, the more likely it is to become chronic. So my dad's thinking actually makes some sense, although I found no evidence to support that.
Okay, Catherine, we got to ask the heavy question here now.
Okay.
At what point did you begin to have some very difficult conversations with your parents about the decisions they made in the late 1950s about your brother?
You know, I'll claim cowardice here. I really did not have very many difficult conversations with them. My father was not the kind of guy who liked to talk about emotional things, and he was a very closed-off kind of person, warm and loving, but did not want to talk about some things. And my mother was suffered from guilt and remorse about this all her life. And so pressing her on it would have been very painful for her. So we would talk about Bill. I would ask about him after every, when I was an adult and wasn't seeing him regularly, I'd talk to her after every visit and we'd chat, but we really didn't get into the hard stuff. And my mother died 8 months after Bill, so.
The guilt that your mother felt, did she ever give herself a break given her own bad health?
Not really. I think she just carried this with her forever. It's sad, in this day and age, I think all of us would have had some counseling or somebody to talk to help us work through these things. But at the time, we did not, and so my father just kind of expected that we'd all just suck it up, suppress the emotion, and carry on.
Were there so-called horror stories coming out of that institution while Bill was there?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, there were.
But it never made your parents reconsider their decision.
That's the funny thing. They should have known, if they had been paying attention to the news, what was going on. But they didn't. They visited him. They would. Now, every time we'd see Bill when he was a child, he had cuts and bruises. I remember, those kinds of gouges you get from a fingernail. He had lots of those. He had scars all over his head by the time he was an adult. And my parents would ask about these things, and they were told, no, it's just normal wear and tear. He's living in a room with 50, 60 other boys. There's a lot of roughhousing, nothing to worry about. So it's not that they were completely negligent. My mother also tried to keep track of his medications and intervened at one point when she discovered he was on an anti-seizure drug for 5 years at that point after something that may or may not have been an epileptic seizure.
Your parents are gone.
Yes.
Your siblings are around.
Yes.
The other siblings besides Bill. Have they read the book?
They have, and actually I brought them into the project right from the beginning. It's their story as much as it is mine, and their memories are different from mine. They remembered things that I didn't know, and so yes, I brought them in.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the book. Mom said her biggest regret was that she and Dad didn't bring him home for visits. Mine is that I let them make all the decisions about Bill, even though I had less and less faith in their judgment as the years went by. I challenged them at a lot of things in life, including how I would raise my own children. But when it came to Bill, I gave them a pass. I know that means I gave myself one too. I let him be their son, their responsibility. In doing that, I became yet another in a long series of people who failed him. He deserved better. You're pretty tough on yourself there, Catherine. Are you really putting yourself on a list with all of those who failed Bill?
Yes, I am. I should have been an advocate for him. I could have been an advocate for him. And in the interest of keeping peace within my family, I chose to back off. So yes, I do take some responsibility. And if anything will make you an advocate for people like Bill, it's reading the material that I read to do the research for this book.
Keeping peace in the home is not a bad mission
No,
at the end of the
it's
day,
not. Yeah.
But you think Bill had to pay the ultimate price for that
He did.
peace?
Yeah.
Was this, I don't want to get too heavy here, but was this book in some respects a way for you to make your peace with all of this?
Absolutely.
It was. And did it work?
I think I'm getting there. It was, it's funny, I kind of switched into reporter mode when I was doing the research on this. It's like you set your emotions aside, you look at this, you analyze, you assess, you weigh, and then you write. And then after it was written and I was looking over the copy-edited version, that was when the emotions hit. So I think it was helpful that way.
Did you have a good cry over it?
Oh, several.
Several.
Yeah.
Because, us reporters are told never to, the emotions have to stay in check all the time, right? It's just the facts.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, we can't be robots. We have to be able to feel. We just have to be, it's a phrase I've heard, you have to be objective about your own subjectivity. And
objective about your own subjectivity.
Yeah.
That's good. What would you like readers ultimately to take away from this?
I'd like them to take away a sense of how much things have changed for the better for the current generation of people with Down syndrome. This kind of life that my brother had was, until his final years, was something that we never want to do again. The institutions, I have to say, did improve at the end of my brother's time there. They went from being hospital schools to regional centers, and I was glad to see that Bill's last few years were actually pretty happy, but that's because even though he was on the institution, he lived closer to a normal life than he had before. So he actually lived in a group home with one roommate and some housemates instead of an a ward with 70 kids cheek by jowl. He had a job, and finding something important to do, interesting to do during the day matters a lot for everybody. So he worked in the wood shop. He had the run of the place. He knew everybody there, and he was in his final days a pretty happy guy. Although the sad part about that is the clock was ticking on his liver during those days, and he didn't have many good years. But the last ones weren't so bad.
If memory serves, at some point, Premier Kathleen Wynne and both opposition leaders,
Yes.
Tim Hudak and Andrea Horvath, made quite fulsome apologies
Yes.
On behalf of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario
Yep.
For this having happened. What did you take from that?
Well, I think that was the first time I teared up. I watched it from my home in Ottawa, and I was so relieved and so happy to see them acknowledging just what a bad idea, what bad policy could do to people like my brother Bill.
All the pain notwithstanding, to write this book, I'm glad you did, because it really does peel back the curtain on a time that we need to know a lot more about.
Yes.
And thanks for doing it.
Well, thank you very much.
Shut Away, When Down Syndrome Was a Life Sentence. Catherine McKercher. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.